Are you a leader, manager, entrepreneur, business owner, or knowledge worker? Are you leading people or wondering how to be a better leader in your own life and work? If you are, then you can be experimenting better. Welcome to The Experimental Leader, a podcast that takes a look at the ways leaders are experimenting in their own work. Hosted by Melanie Parrish, we dive into real-life conversations about how people might be using a scientist's mindset and experimenting in their work. Shift your leadership into something that works better. Join us on The Experimental Leader today.
Hey everybody, it's super great to be here with you live today on the Experimental Leader podcast. We are going to be doing some exciting things today. We're going to be having a great conversation with a guest. But I wanted to start, I was having a conversation over the weekend in the stands at a swim meet, because that's where I was, about the idea of mentorship. And I thought I might, there's a variety of sort of support roles that leaders use. And I thought I might sort of dive into those and talk about how leaders and thought leaders and people who are establishing brands and people who are innovating might use a therapist or a mentor or a coach or a consultant. Because I have thoughts and ideas about those, being that I sort of hold a space in there. And so I thought it might be useful to do that. And the conversation I was having actually was around someone who was innovating, who was trying to create an innovative brand. And what we were talking about is they kept thinking they needed a mentor, but they were having a hard time finding a mentor. And my take on that is mentors can be really useful in like leadership in an organization, because the mentor can really help pave the way. But if someone's actually innovating and they're doing something that's never been done before, having a mentor can kind of get in the way, because the mentor is going to have their own ideas and opinions and thoughts. And if someone's trying to pull out their own thinking, they're trying to create a brand or expand their thinking or contribute to a field in a unique way, having a mentor tell you what you think isn't particularly useful. In fact, it's the opposite of what you're actually doing. So mentorship really is about doing something that's already been done before, and you want to learn from someone who knows how to do it. But the world of innovation is not that. Whereas a really good coach holds the space of helping you understand your own mind. And so for thought leaders, having a really good coach who can ask really good questions, who can pull out of you your own thinking, so sort of pure coaching, is really incredibly valuable. So if you're trying to create a brand out of nothing, if you're trying to do something in a space, like carve out a space where you're contributing something that hasn't been done before, that world of innovation, coaching is particularly useful. On the other hand, leaders have a lot of feelings, and coaching can be really useful in that space, but so can a really good therapist if you're actually coming up against your own limitations. Either a coach or a therapist can be really good at dealing with things like imposter syndrome. If they're a passing thing, or if they're in a time that you're doing something new, then coaching is a really good place for that. If it's something that you have been grappling with and you feel like it's harming your self-esteem, or you're feeling like it's affecting you personally, then therapy might be a good place to look at the why, because therapy tends to look at the underlying issue below it. And so therapy can be a really good look. And then when I think of consulting is the other place where you might hire an expert to help you as a leader. You might hire a leadership consultant to come in and work with your team. And when I think of the space that we do, like with our Leadership Essentials program, I'm actually acting as a consultant. I'm producing material that helps people learn the skills of leadership because I've gotten to walk in the leadership shoes more often because I have many clients. I'm able to help provide education and learning. Then I'm actually consulting to help provide those learnings to my clients or those skills to my clients. Or a consultant might actually come in and do it for you in an organization. And so a consultant can be useful in those ways. By the way, our Leadership Essentials program is a blend of that consulting model and a coaching model where we have coaching involved in it as well. I just thought it was really an interesting conversation that we were having. And I realized that all of these people can be the perfect person given the right problem. But it's a good idea to ask yourself, what is it that you're going for? What are you hoping will happen when you hire someone? Are you looking for them to bring their expertise? Are you looking for them to pull it out of you? Or are you looking for them to help uncover something that you're unaware of? Or are you looking for them to teach you something they've already done? And so those are all of the therapist, the mentor, the coach, and the consultant. And I just thought it might be useful for me to run through those this morning. I'm super excited about our guest today. Our guest is Fred Fowler. He's an author, a teacher, an all-round scrummy guy. He's a former CIO, and he's one of a handful of people worldwide who holds the Professional Scrum Master Level 3 certification awarded by Scrum.or, and has taught more than 300 people to be Scrum Masters in the US, Central America, and Asia. And in May of 2021, he published his second book, Advanced Scrum Case Studies. I am super excited to welcome Fred to the show. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Well, we are going to dive into all things Scrum related. I also ask you to read a chapter of the Experimental Leader book because we're doing book club this year. And you do lots of experiments. So we are looking at chapter 3, conduct an experiment. Anything that you want to just say that you noticed as you read this chapter? I think you thought, hey, I do experiments too, but what'd you notice?
I'm a very scrummy guy, expert in the Scrum framework, and Scrum is all about experiments. What Scrum is an organized process of discovery. It's a framework where people can, in effect, perform experiments, measure the results, learn from those results, and adapt. That's really the heart and soul of Scrum. And it turns out that Scrum, the whole idea of experimentation and adapting and learning from experiments is fundamental to anything that you're doing for the first time, anything that you're doing that's new. That's why Scrum is so powerful in the world of product development. Because when you're developing a new product, by definition, nobody's ever done it before. So you have to discover how to do it. You have to learn as you go. And the Scrum framework is a framework for organizing people to go through that process of discovery and create the most value that's possible through an experimental approach.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what I talk about all day long. That's exactly what I think about too. And I think it's so much a part of what fields do you work in? Like, are you in software engineering? Is that where you're applying Scrum, or where are you applying Scrum?
Well, I started out in software engineering. I wrote my first. I'm an old guy. I wrote my first professional code in 1981. So I've been at this for a long time, and I've made my living as a programmer, coming in and fixing systems that were going bad. Ended up in management I was a CIO. But along the way, I discovered the Scrum approach. And it just worked out so well because, again, it just is perfect. An alternative to Scrum is something called waterfall, where you plan everything out in advance down to the last detail. And then the theory is if you plan it all out carefully enough, then all people have to do is just execute the plan, and you're done. It's successful. Unfortunately, that doesn't work for doing something new, a new product development, new service, new procedure, because by definition, you don't know everything you need to know at the beginning. And you can only learn by doing. You have to try it and see, and then observe the results and adapt. So the world is full of failed waterfall type projects where people try to use that kind of approach to do something new. And by the way, Scrum.
Go ahead.
Let me just make a point. Scrum became popular in the world of software development because in software, you're always doing it for the first time. You never write the same piece of software twice. However, Scrum is being applied in all kinds of areas. I've got a friend in Chicago that's using it for mergers and acquisitions. I've got another friend in, I think it's Portland, and he's using it for architecture. Another person I know is using it for the world of HR. And back east, it's in finance and insurance even, because it's all about solving problems.
That's right.
A product is there to solve a problem. Go ahead.
And that's what.
I'm sorry, I'm talkative.
No, it's fine. That's why I wrote my book, is because I was working with startup software and tech companies, and I realized that so many of the practices that were working in software could be applied universally in other organizations to other knowledge workers. Absolutely, like the best practices are there in software and have been for a long time. Stand-up meetings, all of those things. And other organizations are still living and dying by people's ideas instead of seeing them as experiments. And so this idea of experimentation, when we're doing new things, and you said it as well as I could say it, but I say it all the time. When we are doing something new, we are experimenting, and we just have to decide how long we're going to do that experiment. We don't, in other organizations, we see people deciding something and assuming we've decided it till the end of time. But what we really need to do is decide how to bound our experiment. Are we going to do it for a month? Are we going to do it for a year? Are we going to do it for 3 months? And then we need to collect data to decide how long we'll continue that experiment. And all of our products, by the way, are tech friendly. We don't claim that they're, integrated with tech, but they don't violate any of the principles of tech, because we don't put any concepts that are waterfall in any of our programs or products. So I love that you brought up waterfall, because it's the thing that it's one of our company values, is not to use anything that requires a waterfall method.
Yeah. Now, there's been some academic work about the different kinds of problems there are to solve. And it's important to understand those different kinds of problems to understand, where waterfall fits, where Scrum fits, where the other frameworks fit.
Cool.
There are actually 4 kinds of problems. One is called a simple problem, which is a no-brainer. You don't need much of a framework to deal with that. Now, the next kind is a complicated problem. And a complicated problem is one that might be intricate. There might be lots of moving parts, but ultimately you know everything you need to know in order to solve the problem at the very beginning. And that's what waterfall's based on. Now, there's a complex problem where you don't know everything you need to know ahead of time, where you have to discover the solution as you go. And that's where Scrum and Agile come in. And then the 4th kind is a chaotic problem where you don't know anything. All you can do is react. So for instance, a help desk is an example of that 4th kind of problem. And there's a framework called Kanban for that. So it's very important to understand what kind of problem you're dealing with in order to choose an effective framework to organize it.
Well,
And if
I
you
just
don't
want
mind, I can give you an example. Go
well,
ahead.
and I just
Go
want to
ahead.
shout out to David Snowden for the Cynefin work that he's done. If we're going to talk about his work,
Mhm.
because most of that work falls into the Cynefin work of David Snowden.
That's true.
So
Yes.
I want to make sure we shout out to him if we're
Yeah.
going to talk about Cynefin, which obviously these are really useful frameworks for talking about problems. Yeah, go ahead and give an example. I think that's a great idea.
Well, okay, so let's take the example of you're a developer, you've got a piece of land, you want to build 100 houses on it. By the time you get to house number 99, you know everything you need to know about it in order to build it. You know how many nails you need, how much board feet of lumber, because you've got 98 houses worth of experience to learn what you need. So the 99th house is a good example of a waterfall problem because there is nothing unknown. You can figure it out. You can make a rational plan, get people to the right place, the right time to deliver the house, effectively. Now contrast that with the first house in the list.
Yeah.
That's when you find out all the oopses and goofs. Like, for instance, we put the master toilet right above the dining room so that when people are eating their dinner, they can hear the toilet flush. Or, oops, we put the water heater at the far end of the house, so by the time the water gets to the shower in the master bedroom, the water's cold. So that's where you learn all the things you need to learn in order to get something done. And so in effect, the first house is an experiment. And so you need to approach it in an experimental way in order to solve those problems and be effective. So anyway, that's a good kind of rule of thumb I used when I teach people the difference between a complicated and a complex problem. The 99th house is a complicated problem.
You get a really you really get a chaotic problem if you start to think about building houses on the moon or something, or on Mars, as they're think about. Then you get something really you don't even know what the rules are. Like, you have to start trying to figure out. I remember years ago, I decided to eat a raw food diet, and like everything I knew about food went out the window, because you can't heat anything above 115. You like, it was as if the whole framework of everything I knew had gone away. And so once I had done it for a month, then it was just like doing it. But in the beginning, everything was new and unknown, and it was a little wild.
Yeah.
Well, Fred, how are you experimenting in your life and work right now?
Oh my goodness. Well, with my personal life, I decided to conduct an experiment. I kind of dropped everything in San Francisco and moved to Bangkok, Thailand.
Oh my goodness.
And I've enjoyed it very much because, I came here cold. Didn't know anybody, but I've made friends, and Bangkok is a wonderful place full of kind, gentle, generous, friendly people, and very spicy food.
How long have you been there?
Since March.
Nice.
So nice. About what? Yeah.
What's the best thing about being in Thailand?
What's the best thing about being in Thailand?
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in snowy Pennsylvania, and I think the best thing about Thailand is that there's no snow.
Nice.
A cold day here is 80 degrees, and so I kind of put all of my San Francisco clothes in the closet, and I've bought short sleeves and short pants and sandals, and so I'm very comfortable walking around in very comfortable clothing.
I always, as a coach,
that's a really good thing.
Yeah, as a coach, I always think about people's like underlying there's these sort of universal dreams that people have. And I think like moving to Thailand or like giving it up, putting everything in storage and going on an adventure is a universal dream that people have. Especially if they're working a leadership job or something like that. Like it's sort of living the dream, what you're doing.
At the same time, though, I really haven't given up any connections because it's all over the internet.
Yeah.
You know, COVID caused everybody to work from home. Well, that means people can work from anywhere. And, you know, what I do right now is I write books, I teach, I consult, and I can do that all over, you know, medium like this. You know, I've got a good meeting account with Google, and I actually organize a meetup group that's got 2,500 members, and we get together every 2 weeks to talk about Scrum. And I organize conferences too. You know, the COVID kind of knocked all the conferences out, but before that, I organized 2 what I called Silicon Valley Scrummets, where we brought people together really from all over the place to talk about the Scrum framework and how to apply it in different areas.
Really,
by the way, you know, yeah, one of the most important things about experimenting, especially in the context of Scrum, is to understand what the results are. If you're going to do an experiment, you need to understand what the data is telling you at the end.
How do you do that?
So you need to have a way of, you have to have a way of measuring the results. And I'm not talking about, oh, well, it looks pretty good. No, I'm talking about measuring it in absolute scale that makes sense. Now, there are different applications of that depending on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to, for instance, I did some consulting with a not-for-profit that was basically providing showers for homeless people. And so how do you measure the results? Well, what you did was you figured out what value you were delivering, and then figured out what units that was. And of course, with homeless people, what you did was you counted the homeless people. How many showers did you give? You know, how many individuals did you help? And that gave you a yardstick to use to understand if you tweak something, did it get better or worse?
Well, and I'd say that
the important thing is when you make a change, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say you could also connect, you know, you could also do more longitudinal epidemiological data around how did that change their lives? Did showers make a difference? You know, if you could find those people later and ask, did regular showers allow them to get a job? Did it allow them to change? What changed in their lives over time would be interesting also.
Yeah. Well, yes, and actually they did track that. The organization was called Dignity on Wheels.
Yeah.
And the goal was to allow homeless people to regain some sense of dignity. So they provided showers, they provided laundry facilities so people would have clean clothes. When I was finished with that organization, they were talking about recruiting barbers and hairdressers to basically set up mobile barber shops to get people, you know, well groomed. Well, the whole idea of giving them a sense of dignity and therefore a sense of confidence and the ability to go find a job someplace. So, but they were able to measure the value that they were delivering in a way that was unambiguous, so that they could then make changes and understand whether the changes were improvements or not. Now, in the world of software and business, there's a very simple yardstick to use. And that's how valuable is the product that you're producing. So if you're, you know, doing software, well, you're paying people to write it. So you know what it's costing you. You need to be able to measure what the value is that's being produced, so you can compare the value that they produce with the cost and come up with a return on the investment, which is your yardstick to figure out whether things are working or not. And that's something that companies very rarely do. They don't seem to try to measure the value of what's being produced on a short-term basis.
Mm.
And unfortunately, I've got lots of war stories. I get called into places where, unfortunately, there are disasters going on. The worst was a company that spent $500 million trying to re-platform their entire system without measuring the value that was being produced along the way, hoping that in the end there would be something that would be worthwhile. And in the end, they spent all that money, all that time, and had nothing to show for it.
Oh,
so
that's
one of the keys of Scrum. It's a horror story, yeah. But one of the keys to Scrum is you have to be able to measure what's going on. Yeah. And again, you measure it on a sprint by sprint basis, which is a short period of time, so you don't go too far off the track if you get sidetracked.
If you're generalizing about a sprint, what do you think if we were generalizing and you're stepping out of just software, do you have a guideline? People ask me this question all the time. I usually say a week, but where do you fall on the sprint timeline or the timeline for measurement?
Oh boy. Well, there is no right answer to that.
Yeah.
I've been involved in sprints that last a month. I've been involved in sprints that last a day. Actually, one of the most successful projects I ever did was one where, in effect, we did a sprint a day. Mm-hmm. But the key is that the product owner, that's a technical term, but basically somebody who decides what's valuable to do,
yep,
has to have a short enough window in order to learn what's going in the marketplace, learn what's going on in the product, and make decisions about what the priorities ought to be. So they need a short window. The people who are actually creating the product oftentimes need a longer window in order to create a meaningful amount of value. Mm-hmm. So it basically is a trade-off, and oftentimes there's a big debate between the product people and the developers to say, okay, what are we going to do? And then they say, okay, we're going to do this. But it's important to have a finite period of time so you can actually measure how much value you produce, how much effort it's taking, so that you have some hard measurements you can make decisions on in terms of, do you proceed or not.
That's super helpful. And I do notice that none of the answers were a year. They were still quite short. And I think that's really noteworthy. I want to talk for just a second about your book.
Okay.
I just want to, advanced Scrum case studies, which, I love this stuff. And I don't picture myself like getting that for my beach reading in the summer, or my holiday reading over Christmas. Who should read your book and what's it for? Help us understand what would be, who do you want to read your book, and tell us about it?
Okay, actually, you might enjoy it for a beach read, because what it is, it's 15. It's 15 stories about real problem situations that people encountered and how to deal with those things. Okay. It came out of my meetup group, because every 2 weeks, we ask people, can you submit some kind of a problem you've got or some kind of situation, and then let us discuss it and come up with a solution. So I've been doing the meetup for a long time. I've got more than 60 of these problems written up in my notes. So I took 15 of them and turned them into a book.
How
so
lovely.
Each case it's not very long, but there are things like, what do you do about monitoring workers who are working at home? There's a case about an engineering manager who used to like to watch everybody in the big open office area to make sure they were there doing work. They were busy. They weren't talking on the phone, but all of a sudden everybody had to go home because of COVID, and the engineering manager was kind of at a loss. Well, what do I do? What do I do? Should I get software to count people's keystrokes? Should I get software to find out whether people are logged in or not? What should I do? And of course, the case is about, what do you do about that?
That's super
and by the
interesting.
way, yeah, it turns out that it doesn't matter whether people are working hard, because that's not what you want to measure. You don't want to measure how busy people are, because if you measure how busy people are, they're going to make sure they're busy all the time.
Yep.
And this $500 million project had lots and lots and lots of busy people. You don't want to measure how busy people are. You want to measure what the results are. You want to measure the value that's produced. And if you're measuring value and it's being produced, then who cares whether people are in the office or at home? You figure out what the results are that you want to measure, and then you determine whether that's happening or not. And that's how you keep track of what's going on and intervene if necessary. So anyway, that's one case. There are 14 other cases. What do you do about, there's one case called Bossy Bobby, about a particular developer who's very bossy and makes all the decisions for everybody else and tells everybody what to do. What do you do about that? And then there's another one about a manager who doesn't want to take any responsibility, doesn't make any decisions. What do you do about that? So it was a lot of fun putting that book together. I'm actually working on volume 2, although it's not out yet, because I've got, like I say, 60 of these stories written up, and I published 15. They've been very popular, and when I get around to it, amongst all the other things I'm doing, I'm going to put out more advanced Scrum case studies.
Well, how can people find you? I'm not going to say where, because we know you're in Thailand, but how can people find you?
Okay, well, of course, my books are on Amazon. You can go there, look for Advanced Scrum case studies. You'll find them on Amazon. Or if you want, you can order them direct from me and get a discount. By the way, I've set up a discount called Experiment. It's a discount code. You can enter that in my website and get a 20% discount on the books. So the code amazing. Experiment. Okay.
And we can put that in the
okay, very good. The website is www.svscrum.com. So that's SimonVictorScrum.com. And that's got all the information. That's got the information about the meetup group. That's got the books. There are some self-study materials there if you want to get a Scrum certification. Also, I'm on LinkedIn, and that's really where I do the most. Go ahead.
Great. Oh, well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been so fun to talk to a fellow experimenter, and I've loved having you here.
Thank you. By the way, experimenting is the only way to learn something. The only way to discover something new is experiments. And so I applaud you for being a champion of experimenting. Good for you.
I am a champion of experimenting. Bye, Fred. Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.
If you're trying to figure out how you can use strategic intents, operational intents, and tactical intents in your own business, take a look at my book, The Experimental Leader. Be a New Kind of Boss to Cultivate an Organization of Innovators. You can get a copy of that book for $4.95 at book.experimentalleader.com. I want to get this book in your hands so that you can start having a new relationship with your own leadership.
Well, it was super fun talking to Fred all about experimenting. And I love that he said, anytime you try something new, you're experimenting. I believe this wholeheartedly. And I think one of the things I really want to challenge you to do is if you are doing something new, think of it as an experiment, number one. But number two, think about how long you're going to do the experiment for. And how will you know whether you should keep doing it? So how will you collect data? How will you measure what you're doing so that you know whether or not it works? So make sure you've got that measurement in place before you start so that you know whether or not what you're trying, what you're doing for the first time is a good thing to do or not a good thing to do as you try it. It has been such a great time being with you today. I can't wait to see you next week, and go experiment.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Experimental Leader. We hope you have found value in today's episode because we're dedicated to helping you become the experimental leader you want to be. To access the show notes or learn more about working with Melanie, visit melanieparish.com. Go experiment.